Okay, next up we have Philip Rhodes from the Australasian Cryonics Institute Association, and he's going to be speaking about the Cryonics Association of Australia and stuff relating to life extension and cryonics. Okay, I'll leave you in Philip Rhodes' capable hands.
I was expecting this talk to be a little bit different from the stuff that had been going on beforehand with all the IT and engineers and everything around the place, but after the last presentation this might actually seem a little bit bland. Yeah, thanks to the Singularity Institute for the invitation to talk, it's appreciated. One of the things that James covered actually is the conversion of things that's going on. And this is happening in the biology. My background is in biology, by the way. I haven't got it on the slide, but it's in the bio, and in particular population genetics. And one of the things that's happening is of course, that we've been talking about, is the way that technology, in particular computing and biology and all sorts of other things, are all converging, and that's happening with us as well. So, of course, if people are interested in being frozen and revived at some stage in the future, it's going to require that all these technologies are developed to a sufficient state to allow that to happen. So this is probably an appropriate place to start talking to people. The original title of this, which is a bit different from the thing that was on the website, was Can an Immortalist Have a Life? Or a subtitle might be Live Now or Live Later. I'll talk about that a bit more later on. But the first part is basically relating to my very personal experience about what's been happening for the last 10 or 12 years or so, which is about how long I've been fairly actively involved. But I wasn't here yesterday. I was at a family wedding up at Newcastle, so I missed missed all the stuff that was on yesterday. But when I talked to people this morning, it turned out that most of the talks yesterday were dystopian as opposed to utopian, so I'm going to add to the depression a little bit, I think. So I'll just read this as Homo sapiens. This is my, and I should make it clear to you all, I'm the executive officer of the Cryonics Association. This is a largely personal viewpoint, so if people want to ask questions later, I can tell you what the party line is and what I think's happening. This is what I think. Homo sapiens is in a race for survival. Can the species get smart enough, fast enough to survive the world's current crises which have been caused by the species itself? As individuals, what can we do to improve our longevity? And even if we can, is it going to be worth the effort? An ex-girlfriend of mine, it's where that last line comes from, an ex-girlfriend of mine, after about 5 years of getting more and more interested in cryonics and life extension, would always say to me whenever the discussion came up, well, even if you can be revived in the future, why would you want to come back? The place is going to be a hellhole. So that's elaborated on that statement a bit. Well, I'm not sure how many people are actually familiar with cryonics, but I should just give you a brief rundown. The traditional, firstly, it's a method for people who have reached their use-by date and haven't got any other medical means or technological means of continuing to live on. And so after clinical death has been declared, the body is cooled down and then eventually down to liquid nitrogen temperatures, at which point all metabolic processes have ceased. In fact, the atoms aren't even moving around very much. And in that state you can be kept for decades, hundreds or even thousands of years. And the expectation is that at some stage in the future, medical science and technology is going to have the power to resuscitate these people, fix whatever killed them in the first place, and then rejuvenate them so that they look and feel like 25-year-olds again. The older method, which has been being used for some decades, is based on glycerol and an anti-cocktail antifreeze. There's a newer method which involves vitrification, which is a sort of a direct transition from a liquid state to a glass-like state, and theoretically that should involve less damage because of the freezing that's happening. But the difficulty with us in Australia is that we can't do the vitrification processes ourselves, and we have to get the people eventually to the US, so that creates problems for us, so we end up using the old method usually. The diagram on there is, if you can see it, is a person upside down in what amounts to a very large thermos bottle full of liquid nitrogen, and basically they stay that way for as long as it's going to be necessary. The quick history is that a book called The Prospect of Immortality was written by Robert Ettinger in 1963. It was self-published, and it proved to be reasonably popular. It's been published a number of times since. And immediately that book was published, there are a number of cryonics organisations that set up in different parts of the US. Unfortunately, some of them were run by fly-by-night types, thinking that they were going to be able to make a lot of money out of a lot of rich people that were fairly naive about what was actually possible. And unfortunately, a lot of those people, those companies ended up going broke, and people ended up thawing out and getting buried or whatever. Since then, there's been two organisations, the Cryonics Institute and Alcor, who are both non-profit organisations, and they've been stable and established for a couple of decades now, and they look like they should be able to, and their finances are in really good order, so they should be able to last the distance for, well, assuming that the financial system keeps working, they should be able to last the distance for decades or 100, 200 years or whatever. In terms of numbers, people that are signed up with either one of those two organisations, there is a new organisation in Russia now apparently, Cryorus. They've only just been going for a couple of years, and they've only got a few people. But so basically, there's the two organisations in the US. They've each got about 2,000 members altogether. There's probably getting on for about 200 people frozen, and we know of at least 8 strains that have been frozen. There could be more that we don't know about, because our association is basically just a support association, and not everyone who's signed up with the American organisations comes to us for membership with us as well. Yeah, so I mean, the cryonics has been going for some decades now, and with all the coverage that it got very early on and the interest that it generated, you would have expected it to be a very popular one. Now, certainly when I heard about when I was a teenager and thought, well, by the time I'm going to need this sort of technology, it'll be just routine medical procedure. And when I decided that all the aches and pains and whatever were starting to creep up on me, and I better have a look around and see what was going on, I was fairly disappointed to find the state of the cryonics movement, I guess. And yeah, so there's a joke amongst cryonicists that the Flat Earth Society is more popular than cryonics, and that hasn't changed a lot, although I have noticed in the last 10 years or so that the journalists and the people who cover this sort of stuff are taking it a little bit more seriously. Yeah, in the old days, when I first started doing talks to journalists or just PR in general to the general population, the usual question was things like, well, why would you want to be a popsicle or something like that? It was very, very jokey sort of stuff. But in the last 5 years or so, and I think this is partly to do with things like the Human Genome Project and other things that have been happening, you never get those sort of questions anymore. They're all very serious. They're all philosophically based. They want to know if the technology is going to work, and everyone's very serious about it now. The main question that we get from people here, of course, is when are we going to have an Australian facility? Because there's a problem with getting people from here to the US. There's only 2 real ways that you can do it. If you know that you're on the way out, then you're better off going to the US and de-animating, as we say over there, and so that the team is on hand to go through the procedure that's necessary to get you into the DUR and cool down and frozen or whatever. But that's a problem because, well, not least because of the US medical system. I mean, if you might think that you're on the way out and only have a few days to go or a week to go or something, you get over there and you're not last another 3 years, and if you're in a hospice or something, that's going to cost you millions. so that's a problem financially. If you die here, and we do a preliminary processing here and then have to send you over, of course that's getting more difficult as time goes on. In the old days it wasn't too bad before 9/11, but now there's all sorts of paranoia about what you're shipping in boxes and why there's liquid nitrogen in there. Oh, actually it's dry ice, so there's carbon dioxide coming out of it, so there's all sorts of problems with what's getting shipped. So, I mean, this has always been a problem for us in Australia, less in the US, and so after some years of this and talking to a number of people, I decided that I might as well get something going for myself and my family at least, and that proposal for a place out in Cowra, which is about 5 hours west of Sydney, has been approved by the New South Wales Health Department and the Cowra Shire Council. And that's all in place, but that was some years ago, that was about 5 years ago, and since then I've had my own health and financial issues, so that's been delayed. But more recently, there's another proposal that's been developed by another couple of guys in Sydney, and they're looking at a cooperative sort of venture with 10 people putting in 50 grand each, and which guarantees them one suspension, and again probably putting it in a country town somewhere, maybe still in Cowra. So the question is, will cryonics work? I mean, a lot of the antipathy to cryonics came from biologists, funnily enough, in the beginning, because people who were close to the biology and could see what sort of damage that freezing did were unconvinced that you'd be able to recover from that sort of state. And that was a long time before people started talking about nanotechnology and all that sort of stuff. But there's lots of things that can go wrong, but the point that we make to everyone is that this isn't a religion. We can't guarantee anything, in terms of the religion. I can guarantee almost anything. But there's a number of things that can go wrong. I mean, and I think probably you talked about some of the things yesterday. Firstly, there's one that's happened already is some of these cryonics organisations have already failed. Some of them did go bust and some of the people did get thawed out. Others, fortunately, got moved to one of the two existing organisations, and so actually the first person that was ever frozen is still frozen, luckily. He got moved once or twice. Other things that can go, the main thing with the cryonics organisations is the financial thing, but I think that's been fairly well resolved with the organisations being set up as non-profit and member supported, basically. Other things that can go wrong are technology failures. I mean, there's no guarantee, of course, that in 50 years' time, that even with nanotechnology and heavy-duty quantum computing or whatever, that these people will actually be able to be revived. So you might get to the end of that period and just find that there's nothing left in terms of the information in the brains, and it was all, a gamble anyway that didn't work out. The other possibility, which I get quite frequently from people that are sceptical, is future disinterest. In the future, if you've got all these people that are now living to 150 years old and still looking like they're 25, who's going to be interested who's going to be interested in getting all these old farts thawed out and revived again? So that's a big problem. I don't think from their point of view it's a big problem, but I don't think it is. I think people that have been frozen in time like that are going to be time capsules, and they're going to be, if they can be revived, they'll be very valuable as people who can relate from their living memory things that have gone back hundreds of years previously. It's a bit different to read things in textbooks to hearing it from the person themselves. And I'm not talking about where were you when John Kennedy was shot and things like that. I'm talking about people who can describe what it was like to live in the mid-20th century, for example, out in the bush or whatever. I think a bigger chance for failure is political failure. Another reason why I want to get a facility going in Australia is because I don't like the idea that the US has got a long-term stable political future, and that's another reason for getting something set up here. But I mean, political problems can occur anywhere, particularly when we start running out of resources. There's all sorts of dramas that are likely to be coming up. So I think that's a big chance. As we've seen recently, there's quite a chance that there could be a financial collapse. But the thing that I probably want to talk mostly about from my point of view as a population geneticist is civilisation failure. And there's a number of different scenarios where that could happen, whereby that could happen. This is a list of the 5 Earth's previous mass extinctions. There's been lots of minor extinctions over the times. The one that we all know about probably is number 1, which it's the one that bumped off all the dinosaurs. But you can see that they were fairly large percentages of families, genera and species in some of those. The third one was a big one when 83% of all the genera got bumped off it. So major changes to what's going on Earth. There's no possibility that I can imagine, except for everyone being uploaded and into some sort of synthetic form where the current Homo sapiens could survive those sorts of things happening. And in fact, we are already in the middle of the Earth's 6th mass extinction. And unlike all the previous ones, which were caused by natural events like comets or volcanoes or something, this has all been caused by a single species, which is us. Apologies for the quick graphs. I suppose you've seen graphs like this over the last couple of days. Anyone want to venture what this is a graph of? Yeah. Population, very good. I'll just put some numbers on, I can't see them. Anyway, the y-axis is where the red line's crossing the y-axis is about 6.5 billion, and that scale on there is 1,000 years. So that's roughly about what's going on at the moment. That's for the last 1,000 years. Now that's well within recorded history. But if we change that view and have a look at the same graph from 10,000 years, which is the age that we've had agriculture going, so that's agriculture age, the kick up in the graph looks far more pronounced. But if we look at it in terms of evolutionary age of the species, it looks like it's just about a right angle. And I think that's how, if humans are going to survive, that's how we need to start thinking about how we start managing things, because this, not only populations doing this, but we've got all the other graphs with CPU power and all that sort of stuff happening as well. But all of this is happening at once. And the problem is that this is having a fairly significant impact on all the other species on the planet. So if we have a population of about 6.5 billion, I think it's a bit more than that now, and we estimate, say, there's about 30 million species, that's fairly rubbery figure as well. A couple of decades ago, scientists estimated that there was about 10 million species on the planet. Then a bit later on, as they started finding lots more microbial species, it jumped up to about 20 million. And since the Human Genome Project and other things have been going on, they're guessing somewhere between 30 and 40 million. Craig Venter can pull a bucket of seawater out of the SOC and sequence all the DNA in the bucket and only be able to identify 1% of the species that are in the bucket. So there's lots of species yet to be found, and we just don't know what we're losing at the moment. It's estimated that we're losing something like about 30,000 species per year. So if we have, say, about 30 million, that's about 0.1% of the population of species every year. But if you remember the graphs that were just on before that, that sort of 0.1% on that exponential growth can very easily change up to 1% and then 10%. And we've got no idea what's going to happen with those sort of, if we start hitting those sort of figures. Just as a quick example, if there is a tipping point, as we've been talking about before, with, say, phytoplankton, which are producing 90% of the world's oxygen, and if they all suddenly, or most of them, died off very quickly, it would be fairly disastrous, not only for all the marine life, but of course for all terrestrial life as well. Lots of other bad news. even if there was some way of getting that graph under control, and that, if that was related to disease or anything, even if it was just sensible control somehow, the inbuilt drivers that we've got in the environmental system now are such that they're going to, a lot of those things are going to continue on, whatever we do for decades or maybe even hundreds of years. So it seems like we built stuff into the changing system that is basically going to be out of our control. And if that's the case, then those 1% and 10% extinction rates seem very possible. There's a bit of soapboxing in there. It seems like we're incapable, as we've seen from some of the international conferences on doing something about global environmental change, that governments just aren't capable of dealing with these issues. It seems like short-term election cycles or whatever it is, there's probably lots of reasons for it, but it looks like governments and the world as a whole just can't deal with these problems. So it looks like they're going to continue. And it seems like that's partly because we as a species are not much different from what we were a couple 100,000 years ago. And so when you're faced with a saber-toothed tiger, you either stand and fight or you get out of there. And that works very well in that sort of environment. But when you've got to make planning decisions on a much larger scale, which are much more important for hundreds of years in the future, it looks like we're not capable of doing it. There's some more bad news examples, just from the last 100 years or so. We just don't seem to be able to deal with any of these things, and religious organisations contribute. Another soapbox of mine is that religious organisations are a major part of the problem. My view is that we as a species need to think about really encouraging enlightened self-interest. And that means that we have to, in the West, in the rich West, we have to worry about what's going on with people in Africa eating bushmeat and that sort of stuff, because that's where a lot of these diseases are jumping from species to species. And that's just those sorts of diseases. I mean, there's already lots of superbugs that are developing because of overuse of antibiotics and whatever for the last number of decades. So there's lots of potential for a superbug to cause a huge amount of damage. All it needs is a bug that's got a long incubation rate and a high fatality rate, and it's spread very easily, and it would be around the world and people would be dying in millions and millions before you would know anything about it, about how to deal with it in terms of sequencing and working out treatments for it. There's an argument that wars that have been going on, there's been less conflict going on since the end of the Second World War because of the nuclear threat, and even though there seem to be wars going on all over the place, the number of people actually being killed is not that bad. But I don't think you can use that argument when you've got the threat of global annihilation from a nuclear war. And it's basically only luck that we've got through that. Then I don't think you can use the number of people that have been killed in recent wars as a gauge of what's been going on. This is a favourite quote, and you've got to remember that this was, I presume most of you know the book, but this was written when the Cold War was in full swing and everyone was petrified about a nuclear war developing, and so the description is in the light of a potential nuclear holocaust. But I think the description in terms of walking a tightrope with your eyes closed is still pretty much what we're doing today. And in fact, the nuclear threat has got a lot worse than it ever was, apparently, because now, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, a lot of these things are out of control, and there's ever more nuclear nations conversations going on. So according to people who should know, the threat of nuclear war is as high as it's ever been, and we've got all these other added problems as well. So, as I've been saying to people for 30 years, who've been telling me that the green revolution in terms of being able to grow lots more food and the population of the planet can get much bigger than it is now even, that's not true. Malthus has always been right, and that if we don't intelligently control our population and resources with human life as a guiding principle, then nature's going to do it for us one way or another. And I don't think there's any doubt about that. It's not that, I mean, a lot of the time, for a couple of thousand years, people have had this idea of battling nature and defeating nature, but nature doesn't care about us. I mean, it's completely indifferent. And it will rebalance the situation automatically one way or another, and if that means that Homo sapiens disappears, then that's probably what's going to happen. And sorry, I should have said at the beginning too that the reason that I'm talking about this stuff is because I'm more pessimistic now than I was 10 years ago. If someone had asked me 10 years ago when I was getting very enthusiastic about cryonics and getting determined to be frozen and making all the preparations for that to happen, I was very optimistic that we could get through all this, but things have kept on going bad from a biological point of view, I think, and I'm not as optimistic as I have been in the past, although you know, I'm still hopeful that we've got a 50-50 chance or something like that. The other thing is that from a personal point of view, for someone who's been born today or is quite young today, if we can survive all these other dramas, it's got a good chance of living to 120 or 150 just because of the trajectory that medical science and technology is on. All the things that we've been talking about, they'll keep finding ways to keep people going, in healthy and vigorous lives. But the older ones amongst us might not last the distance, and we might have to fall back to the cryonics option. There's another saying amongst cryonicists that a cryonic suspension is the second worst thing that can happen to you, and the first is being a permanent, irretrievable death. And so that's what we're trying to avoid. But the older people amongst us have got to deal with this personal issue I found about how much time, because it turns out that you've got to end up, because this isn't a big movement, you've actually got to get involved and do something. It's like any other sort of activist sort of situation. If you want something to happen, you've actually got to get involved yourself. And so you end up spending a lot of time on it. And that brings me back to that quote at the beginning, live now or live later. That comes from a New Scientist competition that they ran in 2002. And I forget what the competition itself was, but the prize was either a one-week holiday in Hawaii or a cryonic suspension at the Cryonics Institute. And the catchphrase was live now or live later. But I think that's what we're having to deal with at the moment. We're having to think about, well, how much effort do we put into this sort of stuff? And that means that there's a constant cost-benefit analysis going on about what to do and how to deal with issues in your life and whatever. So the stuff that I've been talking about up till now is sort of, a few years ago I got diagnosed with atherosclerosis and had to have a couple of stents shoved in, and I was a bit shell-shocked because I wasn't the typical candidate that you would think for having heart trouble, but the only risk factor I seemed to have was a high level of stress because of work. But other than that, I wouldn't have thought I was cancer. So I was a bit panic-stricken after that, and so when you think that you're about to drop off the twig any second, you start thinking seriously about what you're spending your time on. And so this has been a fairly important thing for me for the last few years actually. How much time do you put into actually getting the preparations going to give yourself a better chance of maybe living at some stage in the future, or am I better off just forgetting about it all and going and living in Tasmania and growing vegetables or something? It also affects your personal relationships too, and I mean this is well known in the cryonics area, because quite frequently, and Mark can add some information about this, but in the cryonics situation, there's been lots of documented cases where someone will say, oh, cryonics, that's a great idea, I'll be in that. And the family isn't very happy about it at all. Not only because they're going to spend some chunk of money on themselves instead of giving it to the grandkids or the kids or whatever, but because they've got philosophical problems where they're quite frequently, someone who's strongly religious doesn't like the idea of people getting frozen, it's an affront to God or something, so they don't like it. So it causes lots of tensions in your personal and relationships, and I mean, it's done that to some extent with this ex-girlfriend, and there's lots of situations where someone has talked their family into it who've been unenthusiastic about it, about their inheritance not going to them, but going to a freezing, and then they said, all right, we'll go along with it, but as soon as they've dropped off the twig, of course, they just changed their minds and said, oh no, we'll keep the cash anyway, and so the person ends up losing out. And so you really do need to pick your family as well as you can, actually. Not just your relationship, partnerships. The next thing though is that the people that are young enough and healthy enough to manage to, and assuming that the current trajectory of medical science continues, then there is going to be the possibility of personal evolution as opposed to the conventional evolution, which relies on lots of things dying. In this situation that we've been talking about, we may be able to modify our own genetics or make use of artificial prosthetics or whatever to keep us going happily for the duration. Again, you've got to be able to last the distance. So in conclusion, and this was the title of the talk on the website or in the paper, was a race for survival. But there's two races going on, I think, and actually this should be round the other way. There is a race for increased intelligence, which is what we've all been talking about, but we desperately need that to be able to work out ways of stopping the loss of species and the loss of species diversity. Actually, I need to take exception with what James said earlier too. There was a question about when numbers of a population or a species get smaller, there's inbreeding, and that causes mutations and flowering, so that's not right. When populations get small, the tendency is to accelerate the contraction of the population because of the inbreeding and the loss of, the species depend on their diversity to be able to respond to different things in the environment. And if you get rid of that diversity and the population contracts, it tends to go into a downward spiral and disappear very quickly. So we do need to get smarter, faster, and be able to work out how we deal with these loss of species, one, and for the remaining species, the diversity that we're losing. Because what's happening is that all these areas where these species live are getting fragmented, so you're ending up with islands all over, instead of one big, like an Amazon rainforest, it's getting chopped up into little bits to grow hamburger. And what's left over are these little islands, and of course that reduces the diversity of the species that's left because they can't get from one island to the other. And the second race, which is last alluded to, is a personal and individual race, which is versus ageing and degeneration. That was a quick one. I hope we can catch up with our time now, but happy to answer any questions.
Just wondered, did you bring your cyanide tablets? and possibly, could we change the title to the Dystopian Summit?
Yeah, I was a bit disappointed to hear when I got here this morning that it was, because one of the reasons why I deliberately, I'm obviously really concerned concerned about this stuff, but I think it is a really big, serious issue. But I was expecting that the people that had been talking yesterday would have been boosting the idea of the singularity, and that, you know, that we were going to reach this nanotech nirvana and everything would be wonderful. So I deliberately made this a little bit more black than I would have if I had known how dystopian yesterday was.
David?
I'd just like to take issue with your human population graph. Human population is currently not growing exponentially. The derivative of the graph actually went negative in 1963, and it's projected to peak by various United Nations estimates sometime in the latter half of this century.
Yeah, that's right. I should have dotted the line after the present time. But that doesn't actually change anything that I've said. The mechanisms that we've set in motion in terms of climate change and all sorts of other things don't actually depend on the human population to keep on going up on that exponential growth. But I did try and say that even if we got that under control and flattened out, for example, or even went down under humane control as opposed to some dramatic disease or something, all these other things will keep happening, and that's not going to change, unfortunately.
And how does cryonics square with the overpopulation crisis?
Well, that's a question that I get a lot from the journalists. The thing is that you've got to think about the numbers that I was quoting. There's 200 people frozen, there's 2,000 members around the world. 80% of the world's population have got some deity that they're fond of, and apparently those people are happy to go off and meet their respective makers. So even if it was only 20% of the population that was left that was interested in being frozen, that would still be fairly large. But it's not actually the death rate that's the problem, it's the birth rate. And so even if all of those 2,000 people got frozen, it's going to have no impact on the population problem. Of course, as soon as someone revives a mouse or a rat from liquid nitrogen temperatures, I'm sure that a lot of those people in the 80% with their respective deities are going to be thinking, well, maybe they might like to live around a bit longer anyway, and then it might be a problem. But if we just go on the current numbers, it's not a problem with keeping those people alive or frozen or revived. It's actually the birth rate that's going on at the moment, and it's going to continue to be the case for a while.
With the potential of reanimation, is there any advantage of perhaps being deanimated before illness sets in?
Yeah, I've been talking to a barrister in Sydney because a lot of people think that there's a bit of synergy between us and the right to die movement and things like that. And in that sense, I suppose there is. But from my point of view, the definition of death has been changing for at least 50 years. I mean, when 50 years ago, if you drowned on the beach and you didn't have a heartbeat, then you were dead. But now, of course, there's a brain death definition, and no one thinks twice about reviving people. And in the Northern Hemisphere, where people drown in ice water, they're revived hours later. So the definition of death is changing. But my beef, to your point, is that if you've got some terrible disease like Alzheimer's or something, and you want to be frozen, you're much better off getting frozen earlier rather than waiting for your brain to go to mush and then getting frozen when you eventually die because all your systems start failing because your brain's not working. So there is an advantage in getting frozen earlier, but you can't do that because it's either suicide by the person or it's murder by the people that were helping you. So at the moment, again, this is another situation where the law isn't keeping up with what's going on. And so I've been talking to a barrister about running a test case about that. But that would be a big deal and it would be hard to win, I think.
Okay, we've got time for a couple more questions because we're running short on time.
I'm sure it's occurred to many people that an alternative to cryonic suspension is a form of virtual suspension in which you have yourself scanned in an MRI scan or something like that. and perhaps just a small sample of the genetic material stored so that you can be cloned, do you know of any movements or any groups, individuals that are moving in that direction?
There's a number of organisations that are just doing heads only or brain only, and I think a lot of them have got that in mind. In fact, my own parents, whose arms I twisted to get them to sign up for this Australian facility, were in that category. I mean, and there's been other people, you know, they've got no interest in keeping the dilapidated body that they've got. They're only interested in keeping the person, and they're happy to be either revived in a virtual environment or, you know, rejuvenated, synthetic or real body. But I don't think there's anyone actively selling it, or, you know, but people have got that in mind.
You seem like a rational man to me, but what I don't get is if you've got such a dystopian view of the future.
Well, it's been getting worse, I must admit.
Why would you want to be frozen? Why would you want to wake up in this future?
Well, it's a gamble again. I mean, the possibility is that you spend a bit of money. If it does work out, then you get woken up to this wonderful future where we can explore the cosmos or whatever. And if it doesn't work out, then I won't know anything about it anymore. So it's a gamble.
Okay, one more question.
Memory is so precious. I mean, if you clone, you've got your genetic self again, but of course you lose your memories. And how valuable are those memories in an entirely new world where you feel totally alien because you're centuries ahead of you? So I guess I have a fundamental question about cryonics. Just how valuable are memories?
Well, I think from my point of view, the memories make the person. As long as you've got that feeling of continuity and you feel like the same person, that's worthwhile. But I think, also in terms of what you're getting at, I think is that we're aware. I mean, if we had a time machine, we went and picked a caveman from somewhere and put him in the middle of Sydney, it would be a bit of a culture shock. But we're expecting there to be a culture shock, so we're somewhat prepared for it. But I think the memories make the individual and the person, so you need to preserve as much of that as possible.
Excellent. Thank you very much.